So it's officially 7 o'clock. So hello everybody. You're all very welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time in the evening to come to a session. Just a few bits and pieces of housekeeping. This is obviously going to be recorded so that other people can watch this after the event. So, you know, do be careful. We're not going to be publishing the chat line, but do be kind of polite if you are speaking, and, you know, normal kind of good behavior between people if it's being recorded particularly. There's quite a full program that I'm hoping to get through, and the topic is very broad. It requires a lot of groundwork before you get to use maybe some of the strategies. I think the general topic is popular because nobody likes to get lost. No one likes to not know where they are. Nobody likes to, I suppose, be intimidated by the conditions closing in around them, be it because it's nighttime or because the weather closes in, there's mist on top of them, the clouds around them, and they can't see where they're going anymore. But I suppose to kind of reassure you, it's actually quite nice walking at nighttime. It's quite nice walking when the surroundings are closed in. We're all very used to a small radius at the moment, and how that might make you see more in the close proximity to where you are. So typical kind of situations where you end up in bad visibility and navigation becomes more intimidating and perhaps more difficult would be if, you know, if the night falls quickly, or you get caught slower on a route and you're in the dark. If it's a snowy day and there are clouds and snow, so you can't see a thing, you're in a whiteout, so you can't tell the land from the ground, from the sky. It's all the same color. You can't tell even whether you're walking up or downhill. If you've never been in a whiteout, it's like nothing else really. And the same, probably close to, if not worse, sometimes when you're out at night in driving rain, mist, all at the same time. So your torch beam is hitting all of this material in the air, the water, the rain, and bouncing back at you. So you're getting the glare from your torch, plus you can see nowhere, and you've got this reflection coming back off the rain. So it's quite an intimidating prospect. But I suppose to reassure you, all the wonderful features you can see when it's sunny, they're all still there. They're all there to be felt and observed and used to navigate by. It's just a bit of a head game and a little bit of calming down your mind and those worries, I suppose, because it's not going to help you. So it makes more sense to kind of go back to your basics, back to the fundamental skills, and kind of rely on those and go through a process. So the session this evening, it's going to have Q&A at some point, so people can ask questions, and we'll pull it together every now and again. Anya's going to manage the chat, so there's bits and pieces that she can pull together that would be really helpful. Because of the size of the group, I can't do it on my own. The other thing I wanted just to mention, thank you to those of you that are not members that had to pay to join. Just to let you know, if you go to book 4 of these sessions, that's the membership paid, and it means you can go to all of the sessions for free. So just if that's you, if that's you're in that situation, give me a call at work. There's only 10 or 11 of you, but you know, call in and we can work that out then, that you could join, and then you can access every one of these sessions over the next few weeks and onwards. So it's just there, thrown out there. So at night time and in bad visibility, I mentioned this intimidation and the fact that the features are all still there. You still have your compass, you still have your map, you can still read the land, you can still feel what's happening under your feet, you can still remember what happened behind you. And sometimes darkness doesn't necessarily mean you can't see a thing. The visibility can be quite good at nighttime. It's more if the mist is in, or if your vision isn't great at night, it's usually worse. If you use glasses and it's raining. So there's quite a lot of things that can affect your ability to see when you're on the mountain. So at the very start, I'm going to have a quick look at bits and pieces of equipment that might help you do better in bad visibility. And then I'm going to go through quite a lot of things up to a break at around 10 to 8. And then after the break, we're going to use some strategies then to pull together some of those skills and try and give you set procedure that might help you in bad weather or when you're under pressure in your navigation. So it's quite a lot to get through. I will be referencing videos on our website because there's short, sharp sessions on those that will give you more detail so that I don't have to maybe last so long on some of the topics. So just to kind of get your mind in the kind of the game here. I don't know how many of you were able to get out for a quick walk before the session because it is dark now. And hopefully if you did, you'll get a feel for the fact of what conditions are like. I know we all know what it's like in the dark, but just how it feels to be walking outside at night time is quite different to walking outside in the mist or when you're up on a mountain compared to when you're down on a footpath in the valley and you know where you are around town and so on. It's colder, you maybe feel a little tired if it's the end of the day and so on. So all those head games come into play when you're navigating in bad weather. So it's good to be conscious of them and then you can manage them or use strategies to deal with them. So in the first instance, I'm going to set a few tasks. I'm going to ask you, you can choose to close your eyes or you can choose to imagine in your head, whichever way you want to do that. I want you to kind of think of a mountain, think somewhere that you know well, a local area. It could be the beach or it could be up a mountain or in the local park or wherever you like to walk, but somewhere that you know pretty well. And I want you to kind of imagine being there at the moment and what you might see around you, what features you might see. Is it nighttime or daytime? Is it misty or clear? And I want you, when you kind of think about that, to have a think about what features will be useful when you're navigating. So to help you do that, I'm going to get you just to make a fist and just plunk it down on the desk or the table in front of you or your knee or whatever, and close your eyes and take your other hand then and walk around the features that you've made with your hand, but do it with your eyes closed because I want you to try and build up a picture in your head of the terrain. So if you've made a fist, you've got a natural mountain, you've got some gullies running down the features here. You can walk around them, around the knuckles. You can go up along the ridge, across the top of the hand there, over the summits, into the saddles. And then you can drop down a nice angled spur down your arm or whatever way. So that's what I want you to try and imagine now. So just take a second or two to close your eyes and kind of, it's a bit touchy-feely and I apologize for that, but we can't get outside at the minute. So just walk your finger around and try and imagine the shapes of the land and then maybe follow up between the knuckles onto the ridge and into the saddle and then up onto a summit and along the ridge then down between saddles and summits. So you're trying to build up a picture in your head so when you can't see what's there, you can imagine it. And that's really helpful in plotting your route when you're going from A to B. I'm going to go up on that ridge, I'm going to walk along down into a saddle over a top, then drop down into that gully. So you build up a mental picture so that even if you can't see what's there on the ground, you can read it off the map and then you can imagine it as you're traveling. It's what I'm doing there for you is to try and make sure that when you're out, you can visualize where you're going even though you can't see it. So hopefully that was of some use for you to do that. So other things that you can do when you can't see where you're going, if you take a map, I think you should all have maps in front of you. Find a peak on the map, find a hill that you know, and have a look, just pick a summit, and then look on the summit, some of the features that are leading off it, the re-entrance or the spurs or the saddles or colls, and have a look at those features then and see if you can decide what aspect they are. So what direction are things facing? So if we come back to the hand again, I've got my fingers leading off here, but they're not two of them are pointing in the same direction. They're close to, but they're a bit different. So this one is pointing that way a bit more than this one and so on. So it's the same on a mountain. You're never going to get two features that are pointing exactly the same direction as each other. That would be called their aspect, what way they're looking. So in bad weather, often people say, oh, I came down the wrong spur off the summit because they're on this big area on the top of the mountain. The mist drops down on them and they know they need to go down a spur, but they don't really set them up properly and they just assume it's that way, or they've sat down thinking it's that way and then the mist drops in and they get disorientated and they set off and walk down maybe the wrong side of the mountain, but they're still on the right kind of feature, but it's not the correct one. So the aspect of feature is a very important thing in bad weather because it will help you. If you can set your map and you can work out what direction this feature is, it'll help you know that you're on the right direction, that you're not on going in the opposite direction or one that's going off in a different direction. So to be able to confirm that, have a look on your map, look at a summit, and see if you can find some spurs leading off the summits. And just see, are any two of them going in exactly the same direction on any mountain? A way to determine that is to put your hand on the summit and make a line down the mountain, down the spur that you're going to see. So I don't know how clear this is going to be for you because my screen is tiny now, so I can't really see. I've got a massive picture of you, Anya, on my screen, but I can't see my own too well now. So just even to look at no, I can still see you, Anya. It's just my picture of me is teensy. Anyway, it's fine. So you'll find on your map that no two features are pointing on a peak in exactly the same direction. So if you're able to set your map with your compass, you'll be able to see that one is pointing, say, due east, and the other one might be pointing south, or a bit closer together, but still in different directions. So that can help define whether you're on this feature or on the one next to it. So if you compare my fingers there, this one is close to that one, but that one's going in a different direction to the next finger. They're all pointing in slightly different directions. So that'll help you define which feature you're on, just by using your compass to check what way it's pointing. Yeah, so I was just trying to show you a picture on the map, but even on my fingers there, you can see that if those are the spurs feeding off, then no two spurs are going to be exactly the same direction. They're all going to be slightly different angle to each other. And therefore, if you're trying to find the spur off your mountain, you need this one. If you take a bearing along it, it won't be the same as this one or that one. They'll all be different spokes of the wheel. So we'll look a little bit at bearings later, but if you just take a bearing down the feature that you're walking, it'll tell you what direction it's pointing. If you even just set your map, it'll tell you that this feature should be in that direction. So in terms of then trying to sorry in terms of moving on, I suppose that we need to have a look then at the features that you're going to choose to use. So you have a choice about what you navigate to in bad weather. So on a clear day, you can see where you're going most of the time. You just get your direction sorted out and then say, well, that top over there, that ridge down across that direction, and you can just put your map away then and walk and follow it along. But in the bad weather, you do need to keep a closer track. You might need to pick shorter legs and bigger features. So what I'm going to ask you to do now, if you have a pen and paper there, is to write down, I suppose, if you're aware of the fact that there's different types of features in the mountain. I don't just mean like a spur or a reentrant or a saddle or a col, but a different type of feature that will be easier to navigate than another type of feature. So maybe jot down a couple of suggestions as to what you think they may be. It could be that you say, a col is an easier feature to navigate because, or it could be that you describe it as a type of feature. So there's 3 types that I generally pick out. So just jot down a couple of ideas. If you want to throw a few into the chat, that's fine as well. I will be telling you them in a second that I feel are the 3 types. I'm just going to give you a second to jot down a few bits and pieces. Okay, so rivers, peaks, gullies, handrail. Okay, thank you for those. So the things that I tend to pick out would be point features, line features, and area features. So you've mentioned a few of them there. So a line feature obviously is going to be a river, or you're following along a spur or a ridge. A point feature would be a trig point, or would be a corner or a very definite junction in a stream. So there's a point that you are definitely going to know where you are. And then an area feature. So a lot of the time people think a summit is a definite place to locate on, but often a summit is not your classic pointy peak, but it's an area, it's a big place. And if you think of somewhere like Cairngorm Plateau or into Connemara, where you've got the big flat tops of the mountains, you can get on top of them, but you could be like 3 kilometers anywhere on that plateau. and in mist, surrounded by quite steep edges. So you need to be very considerate about the type of features that you select to use when you're struggling to navigate because the visibility is poor. So something that's definite, that you're definitely going to find, that is clearly where you are, is obviously going to be helpful. So if you are trying to navigate in good weather, you may say, well, I'm going to follow this ridge along. It's a big line feature. And if I drift off to the side, I'll know because I'm going off to the side. You know, if you think of your aeroplane with your arms, when you're walking along a ridge, they're along the edge. But if you tip over the side of it, then you'll feel it in the legs that you've gone off the side of that line feature. And the same if you're following along a river. If the river's no longer next to you, you'll know you've left the line feature. So you're trying to find features that you can either kind of put your hand on, handrail, or features that you can't fall off of. You can't drift off to the side without noticing. And so it's really important that you're aware of those types of features when you're navigating, because the top is a very attractive point, spot height, but it's not necessarily going to confirm you're on the top when you are on the top. It's an area where a trig point would, or, you know, if there's a cairn built on the top, it's probably roughly in the center at the top. Things like a saddle, people often are quite say, oh yeah, I'll go to the center of the saddle, when you're probably better picking where it stops going downhill, or where it starts to rise again, or where it drops off on either side, because it's a definite place where the slope is different in front of you to behind you. Whereas if you're in the center of the saddle, it could be like the size of a football pitch or 6 football pitches around you, and you really don't know they're in a definite point. So it's definitely something that you really need to consider. So features that might fit into the point would be, like I said, a corner, a spot height, if it's marked, a trig point, a junction between two definite things. So a stream and a path, or a bridge over a river. Those kind of things can be very helpful and build your confidence when the weather's bad, and confirm, yep, you're definitely here. Definitely worthwhile checking that they're pointing in the right direction. It's a temptation in bad weather to set off looking for a river that's supposed to cross your path at 90 degrees, and you meet our river, but it's going alongside you, or it's going into a very different angle to the one you expected. And it's a very common error that people make, particularly in bad weather, because it's raining. You might get lots of water on the ground, lots of streams appearing that weren't really marked on the map, but they're very definitely there now. But it's a very important thing to consider, to put into your toolbox of what to think about when the weather is bad. So if you're looking at line features, the edges of forestry, which may or may not be accurate because they're man-made, ridges, ridge lines, spur lines, the valley, a river or a gully. So those things can be quite useful because you can handrail them, you can follow them. But they're still, you know, they cover a distance, but at least you can use them and channel yourself down to something else. And then you've got area features, like the top of something, or a big area of a saddle or a col. A lake, for example, can often be, you can't miss the lake, but knowing where you are on the side of it can be tricky in bad weather. If it's, you know, typical lake, which doesn't have straight sides or corners anywhere, it's just rough. Forest, and the other feature that people often forget is a major change of slope, something that's significant. So when you're walking along a ridge, you've got a nice line feature. But when it kicks up steep before the summit, or it drops down, or it hits a plateau, it can give you a very definite marker of where you are along that line feature that you can definitely feel when you're walking. Even if you can't see it, you can feel when you start to climb, because your breathing is up and the ground is kind of coming up to meet you, or you know, it drops off, or it steepens, or it gets shallow. So they can be really good confidence boosters that you can tick off along that line feature, for example. So don't forget the change of slope, which you'll see marked on the contour lines where they get tight together or widen apart. Okay, so we're motoring along. So just moving on then, I want to have a little chat about approach and aspect for route choice. So I briefly touched on the importance of picking a proper route for the conditions that you're in. So there's no point taking out a compass bearing on every single leg and pacing and timing when the weather is fine and clear. It just kind of takes from the enjoyment of the day, and it's not necessary unless you love navigating, you know, and that's what you're out to practice. That's fine. So if you're in bad weather, bring it in closer to you, use what's right around you, remember what you've seen before and be very observant. Notice when the ground is going up and down, notice when it's steeper and when it's shallower, and kind of make a note of those things. Because your senses are somewhat diminished, your eyesight, which we rely on quite a lot, it's kind of diminished a bit. You tend to move towards, or you should move towards, more about the feel and the sensation and so on, and use those other senses. And if it's nighttime, you naturally do that. But if it's daytime and misty, you may not do that. So just be conscious of that and think, right, what can I hear? What can I see? What can I feel underfoot? And predict what you're going to see as well, so that you're looking for stuff. You know it's going to get steep, so you're looking to hear your breathing get hard and the ground to pick up in front of you, and so on. So it just switches you on to being observant. So what I would like to get you to do now for that is to write down what kind of features you think would be easier to navigate to in poor visibility. Just give you a couple of minutes to, you can throw them into the chat, or just jot them down in front of you anyway. Okay, so we've just one in there in the pot at the minute. Yeah, road or a track, large body of water, a wall, a bend in a stream, a fence line. Yeah, the sound like that, yeah, from the river. Boardwalk, forest, lights, bridge. Yeah. So this is actually quite interesting, because the vast majority of what people are picking out are man-made features. And it's a natural thing, because someone's put it there. You must know where you are. You feel secure because people have been able to get in to put that feature there. It's something really important to be aware of. If you're reading maps in the UK, you'll see an awful lot more man-made features, fences and walls and so on marked on the map, and it changes the way you navigate. If there are walls and fences there, you tend to use them to navigate by. If there aren't, you have to rely on the land. So coming from a place where I had lots of walls and fences on maps to working in Ireland where you don't, changed the way I navigated, because you kind of have to work on the contours a lot more, which you should be doing anyway, because walls, fences, man-made features are not always correct. Roads are good, but forestry, which is planted, not always there. It might have been knocked down, not planted, but put on the map. So contours are definitely king in my book. They take a bit more interpretation to learn to read them, but they're definitely going to be way more accurate. They're not going to change over time too much, and you're not going to notice that the forest isn't there anymore the way with contours. It's not going to happen. So I can see now some features coming in from land. So if there's a marker on a summit, it's a great confidence boost to hit a definite. You might do a vague leg to kind of onto a spur, an area, and then another vague leg where the spur changes direction. But it's really nice confidence boost when you get to that forest corner or that stream junction or that top with the marker on it. It just brings you back the confidence that, yeah, we're definitely where we are, and that you can relax and then, kind of reboot and start for your next section. So taking it one leg at a time. So I've got a few selections here for A and B as to what you think might be a better feature to pick in bad visibility. Often I'd see it on an ML assessment where people are nervous about getting it wrong. It's nighttime and you ask them to get somewhere. And some of the decision making they make might seem good, but it causes them more problems. It becomes complex because they're trying to stay safe or whatever. So a couple of selections of A and B, which do you think is easier, I suppose, to navigate, or a more sensible option to pick? So a path versus cross country. So I've described here 3 sides of a square, so versus 1 side of a square. So if you're trying to get from A to D, do you go A, B, C, D, or do you go straight from A to B? The option between going to a summit plateau or going to a bridge. Oh, sorry, a ridge. Can't read my own writing here. Or going to a ridge. And then between picking to go to a col or a saddle or a spur. Okay, so thanks for your answers. I can see the path and the cross country. A path, obviously, it should be well marked if it's on the map. Perfect. It means that there's a way through, probably, unless it's a path to the top of a cliff people use when they finish their climb. If the three sides of the square, so I saw someone say A, B, C, D. So potentially, I'm just going to do a little drawing here. So in your A, B, C, D, why wouldn't you just go from A to D? It's quicker. Maybe there's a footpath around to this point, and then here there's a really definite light, a river or something like that. So that would be a common thing that people would choose to do, say, on an assessment, because they're really nervous about going cross country and missing it here at the end. So they think, I'll do this. And their group are getting cold and tired because they're taking a much longer route, but they're not lost. So exactly, yes, Dennis, yeah. So it depends, doesn't it? It really does depend. But sometimes a bearing over a couple of, say this is a couple of 100 meters where this works out at maybe 800 meters with a tired group, maybe that is a safer route to take. It always depends. It may be that you choose, rather than just trying to get to this point, because it might be really important that you get there because that's the path off, that you maybe aim a little bit to the side of it, and aiming a little bit to the side, you know which side. So you know when you get to that, you have to turn right or to turn left to get to your feature. So you could choose to aim off, to deliberately end up on one side of the feature, to prevent you from aiming straight at it. And if you go a little bit off on either direction, you don't know. So when you do hit the line, you don't know whether to turn left or right. So I think sometimes around here is the safer bet if it's the path off and people are tired and you know the path is there and it's accurate. But sometimes it could cause problems because they may miss the junction here and they may miss the edge of the forest there, and suddenly they're trying to get to this point, and spending 3 times as long to get there. So it's not always black and white, but sometimes the direct route can be good, and sometimes the around the houses route is a safer option. So the plateau and the ridge, I think we've already kind of gone through that. So you know, Connemara plateaus on an ML assessment is a nightmare for candidates because there's next to no features. So you get no confirmation, no confidence boost that you are where you think you are until you get off the plateau, and there's no summit marked. So I think it's important to maybe pick the ridge if that's what you're going to do. Pick where the ridge joins the plateau or something like that. And then the col or saddle and spur we've already talked about a little bit as well. So a spur is a line feature, where the col and the saddle is a longer line feature usually, but it's a big area. So pick a point to the side or to the end of, or the front or the back of the spur. Okay, so the last bit of the approach, if you're aiming for something, think about what angle you're coming at it from. So there was a classic leg set on an assessment I was on a long time ago. They wanted us to arrive at a cliff, and we were at A, here, and they wanted us to get to this cliff. And the candidate whose turn it was to take the leg decided to take a bearing straight to it. It was dark, it was night nav, and quite rough ground and on a slope. So it was uphill on this side and downhill on this side, and this cliff was somewhere in the middle of it. Decided to take a bearing straight to it and missed it a bit and had no idea what side. It's a big feature. It was in a lot of contours. It was a massive cliff. But they had no idea when they arrived here whether they were a bit up or a bit down, and they walked straight past it, and it was a huge feature. If they had just walked off a little bit until, you know, they covered enough distance and then taken a bearing this way, they'll hit it from an oblique angle or a 90-degree angle or whatever way it might be, but it means that the feature is going to cross their path. So it's something that I wouldn't set for an ML assessment because it's too difficult. it's too easy to miss. It's kind of catching them out nearly on purpose. I would give them something over here first so that when they approach, they can't miss it, to give them a better chance. So at a higher level of navigation, the decision making should be that you choose not to approach something from the side like that. You come around it maybe from the front. So definitely consider, it's a big feature. It might be something that you'd pick to navigate to, but approaching it so that you can't miss it. Just take a direction over there first, and then, so it's an unknown feature to a very definite feature that if you're a bit left or a bit right, you're still not going to miss it. So hopefully that makes sense, to think about your approach as to whether you're going to actually walk into it. And obviously with cliffs, go underneath it. Don't try and approach it from above. If it's bad weather, sometimes you can't see when you're near an edge. So definitely to consider a safe approach, and whether, you know, taking that approach or using that feature at all is safe in those conditions. Especially, you know, if it was in a whiteout, I wouldn't necessarily be using a cliff edge to aim for, because you could easily just fall off it and not know it's there. The next thing I want to go through is, once you've decided what leg you're going to take, what features are good for this terrain and these conditions, I would like you then to take a map again and have a look, pick 2 points, you know, maybe a couple of kilometers apart, nothing too long, 2 boxes, and look at the route from A to B and see if you can put down maybe 3 points on the way to describe what that route is going to do. I call it profiling. So you would have done it in geography class, like for me decades ago. You point A and B and you look at the graph of what the terrain might look from the side. So if you can see in this photograph, this picture behind me, you can see the ridge line, maybe. That would be the profile of that ridge line. So that's what I want you to try and do. So take a section of map and try and pick 2 points, and then describe 2 or 3 things, 4 things, whatever, of that profile, what it's going to look like. Okay, I'm probably moving too fast. I can't see if people's heads are lifted to finish, but I'm going to put the next bit in. So in that description, in the 3 points you've picked, if you've not, put in some landmarks. So a saddle, col, a top, whatever those, you know, some landmarks, or a stream corner, a junction, or forest edge. And then to that, I would add some quality statements. So if in your description or your landmarks, you've said a spur or a ridge, is it a narrow ridge, a wide ridge? Is it a straight ridge? Does it curve? What aspect of things? Is it pointing to the east or the west? And some growth statements. Is it uphill or downhill? So if you imagine a ridge line or whatever your 2 features are that you've picked, at first, your description might say it's going downhill on a narrow ridge into a col. And your landmark might be the ridge or the col on the way. And then it's going to climb back up out of that. The spur or the ridge gets wide and steep, for example. And then you're going to reach a very pointy summit. You may choose to write down that it's 300 meters down into the saddle and 500 meters out of the saddle. You may choose to add, it drops by 5 contours, so it's a 50-meter drop, or you may climb 100 meters, so it's 10 contours going up. You're adding quality. So if you think of someone's face, you've got features all over the face there. So if you think of your nose as a spur, the re-entrance around the side here, is it a wide nose? Is it a Roman nose? Is it, you know, what quality is it? What shape is it? To define that it's a different nose to your nose. So when you're walking along it, it's a steep nose with a bump in the middle. It's a shallow, flat nose at the bottom, and then it gets steep near the top, or it's, you know, you've got a boxer's nose or whatever it might be. But you're trying to put some quality. You're not just saying a spur, you're saying a spur with X, Y, and Z qualities, and it's this long and this far. So in bad weather, it gives you lots of confirmation, gives you lots of things to measure. So when you're trying to say, yes, I'm where I think I am, you've got, because it was steep at the beginning and now it's shallow, that matches. It should have done that after 200 meters and that matches. It drops off to the left and that matches. So you're kind of setting yourself up to have confirmation as you're traveling.
Yeah. Jane, there is a question. Can you show us an example afterwards? I think the face feature, it's a really good explanation, but there is a question. Can you show us an example afterwards?
Yep, I can. I think I drew one somewhere on my many sheets of paper, but this may be too small now. It's difficult on a screen. So if you can see.
Yeah, a little bit higher.
I'll try and keep it still. It's hard. Yeah. So what I've done there is it's like a graph. So along the bottom, I've put dots A, B, C, D, E, where there are various features along that skyline. So feature A is my start point. Feature B is the little peak. C is the saddle. And then I'm walking D up the spur. And then I hit a change of slope. It's hard to keep still. Need about 3 cameras. Yeah, so a change of slope here where it's steep and then shallow. There's another change of slope here. So there's lots of features, and then there's a pointy top, and then it goes downhill, flat plateau, steep drop off, and then across a stream, and then I hit some forestry. So along the bottom here of this profile, you could put distances. You're not going to do like 10 items, you might pick 3 items, but you might say the first leg up the first spur onto the top, 200 meters, and then it's going to go downhill into a saddle, 200 meters, 150 meters, and then you can set off and you can climb. Yes, we will be covering relocation. Yes. After the break, that's where I'm hopefully going to pull some of these ideas together so that then we can do. Oh, thanks, Anya. I see your answer. Yeah. So that's what I'm trying to do. You're creating a picture in your head where you can't see it on the ground. And a lot of the time in day navigation, in good visibility, you can't see the end point anyway. So it's really good to have that picture in your head, whether you can see it or not. After all, it's still there. It's still on the ground. You're still going to feel it, and you're still going to climb up and over and notice the terrain under your feet. So that's what you're doing. And the quality then is the distance, the width, what direction it's pointing in, that just defines it as that point and not somewhere else. You can add time into that. How long is it going to take me to get from A to B to C? Well, it's a kilometer, so it'll take me about 12 minutes because it's flat. That kind of thing. We'll look again at time a little bit later. So that's the profile. So that is really, really important. Day nav, night nav, bad weather nav, any nav really. It's a really important thing to do. So let me see. Done. Okay. All right, guys. So I mentioned earlier, we're going to take a break at 8 o'clock. It's 3 minutes to 8 now. So just to very quickly recap, we've covered quite a lot. And just to remind you, there's videos on the website for a lot of those topics, just in isolation. So I'm conscious of moving quite quickly through a lot of these things. So we looked at images. We tried to imagine what we're going to see and walk over. We looked at sensible route choice, picking sensible features for the kind of conditions and terrain that you're on. We looked at types of features in relation to point, line, and area, and the line of attack, so we don't miss things. We need to come at them from a different angle so we can't miss them. We described our profile, which helps paint this mental picture, a visual in your head. And we used our other senses more than just your eyes. So the equipment extra that I mentioned, obviously you're going to need a torch if it's night. You can get, there's tons of them on the market, different, and they're really strong nowadays. You can get them so that they can tilt with filters so that you can take glare away and all that kind of stuff in a battery pack. We used to always carry spare batteries and spare bulbs, but if you've ever tried to change a battery in wet weather, which it will be if it's bad weather, or in mist or in the dark, it's a nightmare because you've lost your source of light and you'll drop your battery and it'll get wet. And so they're cheap enough now to get a second light, and they're good. And you can put on the second light and you know, make your super duper one, put the batteries in it again, but trying to change. And bulbs, there's very few torches now that you can buy spare bulbs for. So it really is a second torch, or someone else in the group might be able to help you while you're changing it. But generally, I just change the torch and carry a couple of them because they can go or they can break. And then you're really stuck. You can't read the map, let alone see where you're going. So, okay, so that's the kind of recap. So after this break, I'm going to look at a little bit about route cards. I'm not going to show you how to do one, but just that aspect of it, taking measurements, prepping a bearing for things, aiming off some strategies then around tick lists and aiming off and features too far, and using the group to sight on your bearings and so on. So that's the plan after the break. So please go get a cup of coffee or I'm going to look at, like I say, the strategies and the tactics now. I showed some models there to some people that were still there at the break time that can be really useful to have in your rucksack, particularly if you're trying to show someone features or to give you an idea. When I talked about profile earlier, it's just they don't translate very well online. You need a fairly good contrasty background. But you can see there what we were trying to describe, the uphill along the ridge into the saddle and so on, how you might see that profile from the side. This was just made from a 3D jigsaw. I think this one is a sculpture of the two lovers, and you can just pick out slices and create the map you want to create. So I've a few of them that I use with groups and put them in my rucksack. It's a good kind of tangible model. You can put it in your hand and you can feel the features and you can see what they look like from the side. If you're walking along the ridge, if you're going downhill, you can look at it from above. So I've used them so much. Like, they're 15 years old, but they're still in perfect nick. And they work really well for people. You can get a bird's eye view like you'd see from the map. Try and keep it still so it's in focus. There we go. So you can look at it from above the same way that you'd see a map with its contours. You can look at it from the side like you would if you're a walker. And you know, if you want to walk from this aspect, you can see it from different angles. So it does help with that visualization. And if you close your eyes, you can feel, you know, it's like the Braille map. You can feel what the map is going to look like and the land should feel like, but on a size that's tangible. I think a lot of the time people struggle to interpret the map because the land is just so enormous in comparison. They can't see the features around the features. Okay, so I'm really conscious of time now, so we'll try and press on. So if you're planning, sorry, the other question was around GPS and apps and trackers and so on. They used to be a little less accurate to try and, I think something to do with the military in the past, they didn't want it to be too accurate, but now they're pretty good and there's plenty of different apps available. Some of the basic apps that you could get is an OS to grid converter that will give you a grid reference and pinpoint where you are. It's not going to tell you where to go. It's not going to tell you what route to take, but it will pinpoint your location. And if you know how to use a grid reference, you can transfer that to your map and it'll tell you where you are on the map. So that can be really good backup, especially in bad weather where you maybe want some confidence and you want someone to say, yeah, that is where you are on that mountain, you are, you know, on that side of the mountain, you are in that particular area. It can be a very useful thing, but I wouldn't solely rely on these things. You need to be able to read the map as well. It can tell you where you are, but it can't tell you what route to take from there. And they're free. The app is free. There is the View Ranger which you can download map sheets. You can, every now and again, they'll put out a full country deal for 120 euros or pounds or whatever, or you can download the various counties or sheets, so that you've always got a spare map on your phone. Or that you don't have to buy a GPS, you can just use your phone. A lot of people have spare phones that they just throw into the pot when they upgrade to the next one, but you could use that as your navigation phone, and store details in there and use the apps on that, and waste that one's battery, not the one that you might need to call for help or let people know when you're due down and so on. So the OS to grid converter, I think it's called, is a useful app for that. But equally, View Ranger will tell you where you are, will give you a grid reference. And they can be very useful if you're in an incident or an accident and you want to report where you are. It'll give you much more than a hill walker can work out as a 6-figure grid reference. It might give you a 12-figure grid reference. So it pinpoints you. They'll find you very quickly. Then, well, as long as it takes them to get to you, but they know exactly where you are. So it can be useful from that regard. I wouldn't put all your eggs in one basket, because like a compass as well, like there's no snobbery about people carrying compasses, but it's still a tool which you can snap, forget, break, smash. So have a spare, make sure someone else is carrying one in the group, have a spare map, because you can lose those, tear those, they can get wet through. And it is another tool. So, make sure that you've got spares and a backup plan, but having a map on your phone has a benefit that you can zoom in. If your vision isn't great, you can zoom right in and look at the detail. And you can also photocopy maps and blow them up, so that, make sure you're clear that the scale is exactly double, so that you can measure the distance and so on still accurately. But if your vision is poor, then, you can blow the maps up and see better. You can maybe get into the detail a bit easier and not stress your eyes so much. Okay, I'm conscious we're drifting off task here. So when you're lost, because I think that's the nub of why people want to come to this, everyone gets lost sometimes, and it's okay. You're directly above the center of the earth, wherever you are, but you still don't know exactly where that might be. So if you try to set a ground rule in place when the weather is good, when you're navigating all the time, that you keep good contact with your map, you don't kind of put it in the bag and don't really use it for most of the day. You keep a good eye on the map at certain key points. So like maybe you stop for 11s or a lunch, or just before you set off, and you pick out a few features, and you just keep that contact with the map, more or less depending on conditions, or the conditions that you can see or have been forecast. Always when you take out your map, set it by the land if you can see it. So there's a big lake in front of you, or there's a forest corner, or you're on a track and you know which direction is up, so you can turn the map to line up the way it would be seen from above. So always set your map whenever you take out your map. I see people reading road maps and they're able to navigate with it upright, the right way up all the time, and they're going up, down, left and right. But your sat nav on your car, on your phone, always orientates the map for you, so you're always going straight up the screen. So do that with your map. Orientate your map so that you're walking in the direction that and you're looking in front of you at what should be there. And then get into the habit of taking out your compass and checking that you've got that orientated correctly. But do it to check what you've picked out visually. So the reason why I suggest that, your compass needle points north. The map is lined up with the writing the right way up. The grid lines point straight up to north. So if you use your compass needle and the grid lines on the map, bring them together, that will set your map for you. So it's pointing in the right direction. Therefore, if you think you're on the top of a peak and you want to get a ridge that's going off in the north or the south, you know what direction it should be, in front of you or behind you. So you've got your systematic approach. That's what you always do when you take your map out. You always set it, you always check it up with your compass, so that when the weather is bad and you're under pressure, you'll automatically do those things. Often people don't do those things because they don't do them in good weather. It's not part of their routine. So they don't think necessarily to do it in bad weather. So it's really important that you have that systematic approach. I see your question there, so I'm going to come back to that in a second, about magnetic north and true north. So always check those two things. So set your map, check it with your compass, and then look in front of you, look behind you, look to the sides on the land first. Get the real evidence first. Whenever I ask someone to see where they are on a map, they always look where they are on the land. They look straight at their map first, every time. Always look at the land. That's proper evidence. That's real. That's what is happening. Is it up? Is it down? So go for the gross description and then go for the quality. Is it wide spur, narrow spur, steep ground, very steep, shallow? So always do that, front, back, left and right. You're gathering evidence and then go to your map. Say, well, I think I'm on this top, or I think I'm on that spur. Have a look at that spur. Is it going down? Is it doing this? Is it steep down? Is it shallow down? And it should all match up. And then after that, find a feature from the map. If I'm there, I should be able to see that spur going off to my left, or I should be able to see the ridge in front of me swinging off to the right, or whatever it's doing, and then look for it on the land. Usually something close by, especially if the weather is bad, you can really only see things that are close by. It should be dropping off steep in front of me if I'm where I think I am. And go back to the land and see, does that line up? Or often in bad weather, if I walk on 100 meters, then it should start to climb up because I'm on a flat bit now, or 50 meters. So that's what you're trying to do, is to find something that proves what you think is correct. And if you get to the situation when you go back with your information to the map and put it where you think you are, or locate yourself based on that, and it doesn't line up, the alarm bell will ring. And therefore you can go back then and start to look again and see, well, what is it doing and where is it matching? Because there's a tendency for people to make it fit because they want to be where they think they want to be. They want to be there and they can make it fit. By describing front, back, left and right, you will describe a feature. So you're either on a spur because it's going down on 3 sides and up on 1, or you're on a top because it's going down in all directions, or you're in a saddle, 2 up, 2 down. Those things help in bad weather because your perception is thrown. You think things are nearer than they are, you think things are further away than they are, because it's not normal view that you're seeing. So I think those very basic things, front, back, left and right, get the evidence, then bring that back to the map and then pick a feature and see, does it confirm that, yes, I am there, because this thing that should be there is there and I can see it. So that is the outline of your approach. There is a video just on that on our website that just looks at the systematic relocation, the approach to that, the procedure, if you like. And if you start that kind of next time you go out and keep doing that, it only takes a very short time to do it. You don't even verbalize it at the beginning, because talk yourself through it. And especially if you're under pressure in bad weather, talk yourself through what you're doing. The group members that you're with will hear you. Ask them to do it. They can back you up. They can confirm, oh yeah, remember we stepped over that knoll and then we went down into such and such. So involve other people because you can check against each other. And it can very quickly turn into a who's right and who's wrong. And it's not really about that. You're trying to get the evidence and use the information to suggest where you are, rather than I'm right and I'm wrong. And, you battle it out as to whose decision is right. So the really important thing is, if this is where I think I am, and if this is where I am, then this should happen, or this should be visible, or that should happen when I move on 50 meters. And if it doesn't, you go back to the drawing board and you recheck your information. So all those things we looked at before the break around picking features and aspect of features, all of those things you can employ in that to try and do your detective work to see if you're where you think you are. So a few tips around that. You can prepare a route card. If you know the weather's going to be bad, or you may be planning to go out at night, or in winter conditions, you might set up a route card so that your bearings are taken and your distances are measured. I'd still do them again on the hill, and then you can double check against your route card, because sometimes sitting at home, you don't have the feature in front of you to check, and you might take your bearing backwards. It happens. So it's definitely good to check it on the hill as well, but it can be a useful thing. And it means then on your route card, you can be saying, watch out for this slope aspect, because that's dangerous slope to be walking on because there's an avalanche risk on that slope, or watch out for this slope aspect because it's going to be really windy on that side and I'm going to choose to go on this route. So if you plan to come down quicker because the weather's bad, not to go down on the north side, because that's where the wind is going to be buffeting you. You might choose to go on the eastern side or something like that. Something I learned in winter particularly, you're maybe approaching the back of a corrie and you're going to walk up the corrie, the back wall of it, onto a ridge before the summit ridge of something. You're in the corrie and you're often quite sheltered, but you know once you hit the ridge, you need to turn right because that's the way the summit is. But you don't know exactly which way right. So it's a broad ridge that you're walking up. So you take your bearing down in the shelter, and when you get onto the ridge, you have your bearing set and you can go straight to the summit. You don't have to stop. Often people get up onto the ridge when they've got to their definite point and then stop and try and take a bearing while the wind is howling and the snow is flying in their faces, and they just want to, and they get cold. So, you know, consider where you take your and prep your bearings. So I mentioned a few strategies. I talked a little briefly earlier about aiming off. So if you're trying to get to a stream junction, or the bend in a stream would be another classic, or a corner of forest, it's better to aim a little bit to the side, plan to, so that when you do hit your feature, even if you veer a little bit off your bearing, you still know when you hit that line, you need to turn right or left or whatever you've planned for. If you don't, there's a good chance you'll be slightly off your point anyway, and you just won't know which side. So it's much better than to deliberately aim to the left or aim to the right, and then you know which way to turn when you get there, and then you can walk into it. So like I wouldn't go too far off. 50 or 100 meters is usually enough, depending on what the feature is that you're aiming for. But it just gives you that wriggle room for wandering slightly off your bearing, which can happen if you take your eye off the ball, or even when the visibility is so bad, it's hard to sight your bearing. So another thing that you can do is to, if you're trying to walk on a bearing and the visibility is very poor, you have to slow down, stop and sight on things rather than, trying the wibbly wobbly of trying to walk on a bearing while you're moving. It just doesn't work. You're better off just stopping, lining it up, picking your features and then walking to that. And if the visibility is so poor, so say in a whiteout or in where you've got the driving rain and the mist and the light is bouncing back off the clouds around you, you might choose, if it's safe, to send someone ahead and sight on them. Or someone behind you might also have the same bearing and check that you're staying straight as well so that you can correct one another. If you're in a whiteout and the steep, or if there's a worry of getting towards steep ground, give it a wide berth by, aiming short of it. Or maybe you might even end up needing to use a rope because you know that you're trying to find this ridge line and then you're going to walk down off it, but you're not quite sure how far away it is. You don't want the person navigating to fall off it. So you might choose to rope up in that situation, even though you're hill walking. So those are a few different tactics. So again, we talked about picking appropriate features. So you may choose, rather than to go for the top, you might choose to go for the big knoll off to the left. It's a really small feature, but it's big on the ridge, that you'll definitely know when you've got to it. You maybe pick that feature and then do a shorter leg to the summit, which might be a big roundy top as opposed to a definite feature. So that would be picking an attack point that will home you in close to, and then you can do a smaller bit of navigation just to find the summit. There was a night nav I was running years ago for Mountain Skills on Trooperstown Hill, which is a classic place that people often use. Tiglin used to use it all the time for night nav. And that was probably the toughest bit of navigation, the worst kind of conditions in summer conditions that I've ever experienced for navigating. We were trying to find the summit of either Trooperstown Hill or a knoll just off it, both of which have a cairn, a definite marker on the top. And we did a full box search trying to find it. We were about 20 meters away from it on our first bearing. And we ended up doing a 50 meters straight ahead, 50 meters across, and a line back again, back again. We were, I think, like I said, 20 meters away from the feature, but the visibility was so poor, we couldn't even see 10 meters in front of us or 5 meters. But we found it after the full box search. We eventually stumbled upon it, and we were able to work out that we were like 20 meters away from it. But that was the toughest navigation at night I've ever had to assess people in, which was really a credit to them because they found it eventually. It's just to give you an idea of how bad it can be. So The other things I'm conscious I'm kind of racing through here is to pick a feature too far. I'm not as fond of this because it means you've gone past something, but if you're aiming for a top and you know, if I start going down, I've passed it, that can be quite useful, and it can stop you from going too far on and wasting your energy. And if you're on a bearing, you can turn and use the bearing to go backwards, to reverse where you've been. It's called a back bearing, and there's more details around that, but we don't really have too much time to go into that. So just to kind of summarize that, setting up a route card, it gets you thinking about plans, taking measurements in shelter. So, you know, standing behind someone to take a bearing, using your knee and bending down so that you're not being buffeted by the wind. Taking a bearing in preparation before you get to the exposed ridge or the summit. Have your bearing ready to leave the summit, or, you know, those kinds of things. Deliberately aiming off so that you know what direction to go looking when you get there. Something else that is common, more common so these days, is having phones in pockets. If you're using a bearing, which you should be doing in bad weather, along with timing and pacing, people with phones in pockets, it pulls the bearing off in different directions. So when you're sighting, obviously it's magnetic, so your compass needle is going to be drawn if there's metal in the vicinity. I don't know if you can see that, or even if it's working. It's hard on a screen because it needs to sit flat for the needle to float around. But if you've got phones and any keys or metal items, do not put them in your kind of chest pockets. Put them away, out of the way. And when you're taking your bearings, you want them, you know, you want to be standing with the compass in at your chest, not out away from you. If it's in at your chest, you can see down onto the needle and see that it's sitting in the right place. It's not just off to the side a little bit. So there was another question, I think. If doing 3 peaks, for example, would you ever try avoid incoming weather to stick to your route? Even a belt buckle can throw it up. Yeah, no, definitely it can with the compass. They're going too fast, but they're gone before I can read them.
Yeah, you can bring them a little bit higher if you like. Somebody said you can use the wind to navigate. If west wind is forecast, your route goes west, which should be face.
Ah, yeah, there we go. I've just turned off the participants bit. Yeah, so I suppose just to recap, there's a number of videos on the website that look at features in isolation, that look at systematic approach to relocation, that look at taking and walking on a bearing. I'm trying to remember the other ones now, but there's quite a few. But prior to this as well, some of you will have been at some of the longer classroom sessions on maths for the mountains. So timing, pacing, bearings, those are all described in a classroom, which would be more interactive than this. Features and map reading, the 3 norths. Someone was asking about magnetic north and I can't remember whether it was grid north or magnetic north.
True north.
True north. Yeah,
true
so
north and grid north.
Yeah, so there are 3 norths. The north on your map is like your kind of your classroom north. They've made the Earth square, if you like, and they've created vertical and horizontal lines. So that's your kind of your classroom north, your grid north. Your magnetic north, it's a natural thing because magnetism is moving inconsistently, but it's consistently moving. So it varies. So when you take a bearing off your map, you're taking a grid bearing. So it's like your classroom bearing, but you need to translate that to your on the ground bearing, your land bearing. So when you measure a bearing on a map, the top of the map is north, and then east is 90 degrees, south is 180 degrees. What you're doing, if this is north, you're measuring the angle from north around to where you're going. So if you're heading out to the east, then it's going to be 90 degrees. And if you're heading south, it's going to be 180 degrees. So it's a protractor. So it's very useful that people understand that. So the north on the map is textbook, where the north, the magnetic north, the one that the needle is drawn to, is natural, and therefore you need to bring those 2 norths together. So you need to correct your grid north to accommodate the fact that magnetic north, you're using the magnetic north to tell you where north is. Some people are good and can tell you where north is just in their heads. I can do it a bit, but I wouldn't want to bank on it in bad weather. So the compass tells you where north is. The map tells you where north is when it's lined up, and you bring the two together, and then that will allow you to take a bearing and walk and translate your bearing from the map onto the land and use it. So true north is North Pole, and not much use to you in terms of walking. You can get an idea of north from the stars, the north, if you know where the North Star is. It can give you a fairly good indicator of which direction is north, but in bad weather you can't see the stars, so it's not much use to you then, but your compass will tell you where north is. And I'll just quickly say there's a formula and there's information on every map on how to work out what that variation is. So when you're taking a grid bearing to put onto the land, you add a variation which you work out. It's different in different places and it changes yearly. So generally every year, 10 minutes, a degree is made up of 60 minutes, a bit like time. And every year it changes by 10 minutes. So every 6 years, the variation will change by a degree. The variation is decreasing. So you'll find on your map, there's a little box, and there's a video on this as well in proper detail. This is an oldish map. You see, this box here you'll find, it's not very clear, I'm sorry, where you've got the three norths described at the bottom, and above it, it will describe your reference point. So what year the map was made, what the variation was in that year, and how much it changes every year. So those three bits of information, so if it's 10 years old, then it's changing at the moment 10 minutes a year thereabouts. So it will change by a minute, a degree and 40 minutes. So on that map, it'll say in 1990 or 2010 or whatever, the variation at the center of the map is on this particular map, it's quite old, 9.2 degrees west of grid north, and that was in 1990. So it is quite an old map, but it will describe that. So I don't have time to go through that entirely here, but there is a video on that as well, so you can have a look at it in more detail. And there's a classroom session on it also, so you can do some tasks and practice that out as well. So in kind of summary, the grid north is your textbook. The magnetic north is the needle of the map, the thing that people are not so good at knowing anymore. So we use that tool to tell us where it is, and we bring them together. So when you're setting your map with your compass, the writing the right way up is telling you where north is. Only orienteering maps may change where north is. So every map that you use, north will be to the top, and then I can't show you a flat compass because it stops spinning. But the magnetic needle, the red end of the needle there, is going to point to north for you. So you just line that up with where the north lines are on the map. So I'll have to put it upside down because north is downhill on this map. Okay, where is it? Come on, move. Yeah, see, it just demonstrates that you have to have your compass flat for it to be able to float freely around. Okay, so the videos, just I'm seeing the question there. So on the mountain training tab on the website, you click on mountain training, and then on the left hand side there's a list of awards and schemes and whatnots. But then there's a skills videos section. So there's a good few bits and pieces on climbing, on movement skills for walkers and for climbers, on some climbing setups, belaying, rope work, and so on. Down at the very bottom, then you'll see some of the longer sessions as well, taking bearings and so on. I can see someone put their map skills 1, 2, or 3 and taking bearings. So there's quite a lot of material there. And just scroll down through them, you'll see them. You can click it into the YouTube channel as well. It's a better, kind of bigger screen that you can get into. So yeah, you can Google what the magnetic variation is. it's not that difficult to work out, but if you're just not into maths, and many people are not, then you can Google and find out what the magnetic variation is for that particular area, but just know that it's not the same everywhere. And if in doubt, don't do any magnetic variation, because if you get it the wrong way around, you will have a big difference. It's in and around 1 to 2 to 4-ish. So, you know, if you turn it the wrong direction, you could end up with a 2 to 8 degree error, which is significant over a long distance. But most people have phones and can Google these days. Okay, so let me see how we're doing. So just another 4 minutes. Move on. So just quickly, if you're traveling in bad weather, it's good to be able to plot your progress across the terrain so you know how far you've traveled. And there are 2 ways to do that in bad weather particularly. So you can count your steps, you can pace. So you know that this leg is going to be 300 meters. You can, all of you do this as a task after this. Find a map of your area, pick 2 features, measure how far apart they are. So say they're 100 meters apart or 200. And then every time when you're walking from one point to the next, count every time your right foot hits the ground, and you'll come up with a number. So if you do it over 100 meters, you'll come up with a number somewhere between 50 and 70 or 80, depending on your stride length. If you pick your right leg, you're counting every second step. So you're counting double paces. Go up the way, come back the way, do it on the flat, do it on the shallow uphill, shallow downhill, steeper uphill, steeper downhill, and do it a few times and get an average and make a note of it. So you'll end up with flat, uphill, shallow, you know, five different numbers. And that way then, if you know you're going to walk 200 meters of a leg and your number is 65, for example, I'm going to count 65, tick that off, that's 100 meters covered, and then I'm going to do another 65, that's my next 200 meters covered. And it will help you plot your progress. It'll give you confidence that you know how far you've traveled. If when you get there, it's not matching up, you walk on another little bit and your feature's there, it tells you, well, I wasn't quite as far along as I thought I was. And you can self-correct as you travel. So that's an exercise you can definitely do in your 5 kilometer radius tomorrow. You can go and get your 5, if you're in town or if you're out in the country, you can go and get your 100 meters on whatever tarmac or grass or whatever your locality provides. And you write them down. So get a bit of laminated, you know, something like this. You can buy them as well. You probably can't see that because it's you can see there's a grid, and you can buy them or you can make your own on the computer. But it will record, you can plot down your pacing for 100 meters and 200 meters and whatever else it might be on the different terrains. The other way to plot your progress, yes, beads are good. You can use your fingers, but sometimes you lose count, which was that 500 or 600. So using beads to slide down can be useful. Picking up stones, throwing them away or picking them up, whichever way, can be really useful to plot your progress. But definitely do not say I'm doing 700 meters. I do 100 paces for my 100 meters, that's 700 paces, and off you go counting to 700 because you're bound to lose count somewhere. So clock off your 100 meters. If you do lose count, it happens to everyone, you at least know, was I under 50 or was I halfway in my 100? But at least you know to start looking in the last leg to keep an eye out for your feature. You're not going to be too far off. And in bad weather, I find pacing way more confidence inspiring because you're constantly in touch with the ground than timing, which is the other way of plotting your progress. So you know what speed you move at, or you can work it out by recording how long it takes you to cover 100 meters or a kilometer. There's a formula there, there's a video on it as well, and a presentation. There's a number of presentations, kind of death by PowerPoint, but they're there for you to stop and start and kind of go through some of the tasks and take your time at it. When you're plotting your progress in time, the average speed is 5 kilometers an hour, breaks down to 12 minutes for a kilometer, and a very rough and ready is half a kilometer is 6 minutes, and a quarter of a kilometer, 250 meters, is 3 minutes. You don't all generally need to be much more accurate than that for your timing. how many kilometers is my walk today? 5. It's going to take me an hour. 5 kilometers an hour, 12 minutes each. So how long is this leg? It's going to be 250 meters. That's going to take me 3 minutes. Thrown into the pot then, if you're going uphill, if you're on difficult terrain, it's obviously going to shorten your stride length, which you'll accommodate in your pacing. And it's obviously going to take you longer if it's steeper ground or complex terrain that you're walking on. So notice that you can put in a formula, add a minute for every contour you're going to climb, 10 meters. Or some people move faster than that. But as a rough and ready reckoner, 12 minutes for a kilometer, a minute for every 10-meter contour line you're going to cross. And then you can add breaks and rest stops on top of that. It's called Naismith formula, and you can do it, if you're a fast walker, you can move it down to 6 kilometers an hour. And if you're a slower walker, down to 3 or 4. Or if there's snow on the ground, you might move at 3 kilometers an hour because it's just slow. So, or you're tired. So you can play around with that. And again, rather than trying to do the calculations all the time in your head, you can use your just need a blank. You can plot it on a bit of card or a laminate and just punch a hole in the corner and attach it to the string of your compass. So you've got it there to use whenever you need to. And just be conscious, your pacing changes. After having children, my pacing changed bizarrely. In snow or in wet conditions, in the dark compared to in the light, in bad visibility and so on. So just be conscious. You use the pacing and the timing to check that you're making the proper progress, but you combine that then with checking that you're hitting those features at that time. And if you're a bit short of them, you can correct. I'm walking slower in this because there's heather on the ground and it's affecting my stride. But also you can just notice that your stride is being affected. You're zigzagging because it's steep ground, so you're not making all forward progress. Some of it's off to the sides. So they're good and can be very accurate with practice. So let me see where we're at. Timing and incredible. That's all my list of what I thought I wouldn't get through. So the pacing chart, I can just see some questions there. That we've presentations on the website. So you could print off the pacing chart, but the pacing chart is one that you'd need to populate yourself. So you'd write down number of paces for 100 meters on the flat. Walk 100 meters, pick 2 features on the map because you don't all have a 100-meter tape measure. So just find somewhere on the map that's every time your right foot hits the ground, double paces, and just write it into your chart.
Yeah, there was a question, Jane, earlier on about relocation strategies.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. So the description that I was giving there, you stop, you set your map, you check that the map is set with your compass. You look at the evidence front, back, left and right, what's happening, what features can you see, what feature are you standing on, how big is it, the quality of it. And then you go back to your map and say, well, I was along this ridge somewhere heading, or I was in this valley somewhere heading in this direction, and I was expecting to arrive at. So what I've gathered here tells me that I'm standing on a spur. It's going down on both sides, up in front of me and down behind me. It's narrow rather than wide, and it's narrow. It's only 100 meters wide, and ahead of me I can see it gets wider. So you've got all those descriptions, and then you go back to your map. Where on that ridge that I've been walking along that spur does that happen? So it could be, you might locate 3 places, possible places where that might be where you are. And then if I'm here, it should get steep in the next 100 meters. If I'm here, it should go downhill into a saddle in the next 100 meters. And if I'm here, I should get onto the summit. So that's a way of checking where you might be. It may be very clear when you've done your evidence gathering that you're actually where you thought you were, or that you're very definitely not where you thought you were because it's going in the wrong direction, or you're in a valley rather than on a spur. And so that systematic approach is what I would describe as your relocation strategy. There's a number of things you can do, taking bearings off stuff, but in bad weather, you can generally only see what's very close to you. You've got a good idea of what you've walked over. You can use some of the features behind you, but you can't necessarily start taking bearings off other mountains and distant features because you just can't see them. So it's the near that you're having to use, and the information behind you, you know, and you can walk on and gather more information. I dip off to the side a little bit and just see, is there a re-entrant down there? There should be, and have a little look and see, is that feature exactly what you expected or is it not? So just again, there's a couple of questions there about contours and minutes and adding. So if in Naismith, he says add a minute when you're ascending, because A, your stride is shorter. B, it's the hypotenuse if you want to go there, because the distance as the crow flies is shorter than the actual distance on the ground. So you kind of accommodate that with more strides in your pacing and also more time in your timing. So you add a minute. But in descent, it can sometimes be slower because you're picking your way through or you're zigzagging. So that's where it's a matter of interpreting and observing what's happening under your feet. If you can walk quite easily, you can take longer strides in your descent. It's a very safe, shallow descent slope. You might add nothing because you know you're moving faster. You don't take anything off. But just in the back of your head, you might think, well, I definitely wouldn't be walking this fast on the flat. I'll be walking a bit faster now because I've got momentum and gravity helping me. So I might get there sooner. I wouldn't necessarily be changing my pacing. I might use my flat pace in descent because it's so easy and I can tell I'm doing long strides and I'm flying along. So I might expect I'll get there a bit sooner. So if I've got a 300-meter leg, when I get to 250 meters, or the time tells me I should be at 250, I start paying attention to start looking for my feature because it may appear faster. And the same in ascent or difficult ground. You think, I'm not going to get there in time. It's actually slower and more difficult than I thought it would be because there's long grass and I'm sliding around and I'm having to negotiate P tags or whatever it might be. But you know you're going to be slowed down. So it's definitely good to observe that. Okay, so there's some more questions. Yes, you do. I was saying, yeah, you definitely have to change. Do check your pacing every now and again. So hopefully you don't need to use it all the time because it's quite antisocial. Yeah, or in the dark. Yeah, so darkness can slow you down. You end up taking ages if you're doing lots of navigating and you can't see where you're going so well. You decided to turn off your compass so that your night vision isn't destroyed. Yeah, you can take longer at night time. Yeah, Declan, you mentioned different maps. So on the Ordnance Survey maps, a lot of maps use a 10-meter contour interval, but Harvey's maps will use 15-meter contours. Some maps use 20-meter contours. So it's definitely well worth checking that. If you've got more contours, you've got more detail. If you've got fewer contours, then miss more because they only record what's at that line. But definitely for timing, it's important you notice, pay attention to the different maps.
There's a link to a pacing card as well.
Yeah. Night navigation is a dark art. So I notice on assessments, we've about 6 minutes left, guys. These are great questions. Thank you so much. I've noticed on assessments, some people can be fantastic in the day because they've got good land reading skills. They're really good at interpreting what the map is saying and relating that then to the land and vice versa. And that sometimes can be the hardest thing to get good at. And just, it needs lots of practice, orienteering courses, find navigation, go to a small area and navigate all the contour lines, walk around the contour lines, go into all the nitty gritty, just roadside. You know, this is the perfect time for that. You can do that if you've got somewhere you can walk. What was I going to say there? Sorry. Yeah, and at night time then, people that are really good on the land can be absolutely thrown because they're so heavily dependent on their land reading skills. And they can't use that so much at night time. And other people thrive at night because they can use their compass, they can time, they can pace. And I had one student who treated it like walking on a graph. He would measure his distance from A to B, he'd look at the profile and he would walk, but he didn't have a deeper understanding of what the terrain was doing beneath it. And if he happened to take a bearing between two wrong points because he wasn't where he thought he was, he would have potentially walked off a cliff because he had ground understanding beneath it. So it's a whole package for navigation. You need to have that land interpretation understanding, which these things really help with, and being able to see that as a map, and then see it as an actual feature and a 3D on the land. And then to be able to have those tools, the compass and the bearings, and have confidence in them, and your pacing and your timing, and knowing which to use and when. And in bad weather, the more you practice that systematic approach, the more likely you are to use it when you really need it, and not just, I say, I've not taken my compass out for weeks. I've not really navigated much because it's been clear visibility all through the summer. And I'm tired and I can't be bothered to take my stuff out of the bag. I'll be grand. It's just down here. I'll be fine. So it's really useful. And if I've not really touched upon, and there's not really time particularly, but I've not really touched upon the dynamics of trying to navigate when you're with a group of peers in your club, and they're all standing looking over your shoulder, and as soon as you take your map out, they assume you're lost, and all of that head game that comes into it. But I think definitely involve people, definitely talk through what you're doing with people, and say, well, the weather is bad. I can see that the mist is coming in. I'm going to take a bearing now while I can still see features. And there's no shame in taking a feature down to the car park if you know the route is safe that way before the cloud drops down. You still had to take the bearing, and you can then use that to get off the mountain. And there's no shame in taking a very gross bearing down to the bottom there to use, and then you can chat away and keep a rough eye on it and just keep you on track on the way out. Ideally, you don't want to be pacing, timing, and walking on bearings, and not be able to communicate or look around you at all. Martin, yes, I do think people have natural compasses. I can tell you where north is no matter where you put me. There you go. But I still wouldn't want to rely on it. I still like to have the compass there as well. But I think it takes practice, and I don't know that you can necessarily train for it. Oh, there you go. Someone's saying you can train for it. But I would definitely not be teaching that on my courses. But it would be really interesting. I'll have a look at that. That would be fascinating. Mm-hmm. So it's 2 minutes to 9. I can't believe we got through everything to some degree. Definitely go back through, and thank you so much for your patience. I'd be curious to see how many people have survived the 2 hours. Pretty good. So it's thank you so much, Anya, for all the support and the help on this, because it is quite tricky. Honestly, lads, this only went out on Thursday last week or Friday, and I woke up on Saturday thinking, I hope we get some participants. So it's quite a surprise when I saw the numbers. Oh, something there went up, but I missed it. It just goes by so quickly. Just see if I can catch it. Oh, no, it's gone off again. Okay, so there's lots of lovely comments coming in, guys. If you do have any feedback, I have an email address, jane@mountaineering.ie. Or Anya@mountaineering.ie, just to share the love. But there are qualifications and courses and schemes and syllabi content on the website that you can look at. There's lots of trainers around the country, over 90. If you want to do more training, this shouldn't really replace face-to-face training when we can do that. It's really to help dip back in, to remind yourself, to refresh, and so on. But obviously these things need to be done on the hill or in the outdoors, and practiced and done in a safe place. So if you get lost, it doesn't matter too much. And everyone does get lost. It's okay. You don't need to be perfect all the time. I never get lost, but everyone else is allowed to. No, I do. So it's okay. But yeah, there's a lot of pressure on the leader to never be lost. It's what you do about it that's important. Okay, guys, it's 9 o'clock. Loads of thank yous. Thank you so much. The videos are very good. There's a good few different topics. Definitely dip into those. I'll send on a follow-on email with some links and bits and pieces to people. And the guys that are joining as non-members, thank you so much. And do get in touch if you have any other questions around other sessions that are on as well. Just to let you know, there's a whole suite of courses, and Anya has really interesting 2 courses on archaeology, so you should just definitely have a look at those. It'll be really interesting. Okay, thank you very much, guys. I'm going to switch off now.